today marks World Mental Health Day, and it's being observed under the theme, "It's time to prioritize mental health in the workplace." Now, the World Health Organization ranks depression as the leading cause of disability and ill health worldwide. Meanwhile, a 2016 study has found that lost productivity due to depression-related absenteeism cost the South African economy an estimated 233 or 32 billion rand. Let's get a better grasp of this issue. Bring in SADC's affiliate researcher, that's Dr. Bronwyn Drozanovsky-Venter, who is with us via our video link. And Doc, I hope I didn't butcher your surname. Welcome to the SABC News Channel. It's great to have you with us, especially on this incredibly important issue. We really appreciate your patience. Where does one start when we try to take stock of mental health issues, especially in the workplace where one is expected to constantly perform? And let's face it, a space where, unless you have an issue related to your work until recently, it was very hard to say that you're struggling.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much for having me. And no, you didn't butcher my surname. In fact, you did remarkably well. So thank you very much for that introduction. I think what's really important when we think about workplace research is to understand that work stress is a continuous stress in our lives. When we at SADC did research around COVID-19 and around the lockdown, what we discovered was that while people were worried about lockdowns, and then we also did more research around load shedding, people were worried about that. The biggest thing or the biggest stressor was, how am I going to get my work done? And will there be an economic impact from COVID-19? Will there be an economic impact from load shedding? And will that impact be job losses? So in other words, these workplace issues are in some case omnipresent. We see in Gallup studies that over 88% of workers in the United States experience high levels of stress. We also see an Ipsos study here in South Africa sort of confirming similar findings. But what's particularly interesting to us is how it happens in South Africa. How does this work? Because we don't have the Great Resignation as our solution. We've got rampantly high unemployment. 4 in 10 that we surveyed are absolutely terrified that they're going to lose their jobs. And so in broad strokes, people can be unhappy, people can be dissatisfied, but they have to remain in jobs because jobs are so scarce. Yeah. And so I think that it's particularly important that we look at that in our context.
Yeah, I suppose you've answered this slightly, but it's worth asking explicitly. What's at the center of the discontent, at least from the line of work that you've been able to do? You know, are people finding that they're not getting rewards for the work they do? Are people perhaps in jobs that they have to settle for, not necessarily jobs that feed their passion? In what nature are you finding that this discontent is manifesting?
So this is a really great question. You know, it's a funny stat, but we had 61% who wished that they could afford to quit their jobs. Then we had 60% who said, no, I don't mind doing the individual tasks in my work. So it had to be something around the way that the work was being arranged. One of the biggest stresses was the fact that they're not being paid enough to keep up with inflation. And that was for about half the sample, just really feeling that pay was irregular or insufficient. Then we also see that there have been a lot of resignations. So people are sort of saying, I'm doing a job and a half or 2 jobs for the same stagnant level of pay. Another big issue is the fact that people really struggle with a constant flow of communication coming through from their bosses. And as a consequence, 75% think about work when they're not at work. So this inability to switch off seems to be a huge source of discontent, along with the fact that there isn't really a lot of autonomy given to people to decide how hybrid work is going to work. 60% of the people that we surveyed have gone back to the office and don't even have the option of hybrid work. So it's a combination of acute factors.
Sure, that's really insightful. I suppose this conversation wouldn't be meaningful without speaking about ways in which managers can assist, but in many instances I have seen places where managers themselves are under a lot of pressure.
I think you're spot on. It's almost as if you've read 963 voices' minds in terms of our survey. It's exactly right. You know, I think in many instances, there's a good relationship between the employee and the line manager. So good, in fact, that 50% or 48, so close to 50%, are very comfortable to talk to their line managers about sensitive topics. So what's amiss? there seems to be a disconnect between line managers and top management. There also seems to be a sense that employees are desperately concerned that their managers don't have good habits. So if their managers are contacting them night and day, they feel that they have to respond night and day. And in fact, quite a few young employees were sort of saying, can our managers please model better behaviors? Because if they could, then we would learn the right way to develop a work-life balance. And because they're always switched on, we're always switched on. So that's definitely something which could be done.
Yeah, I think we are yet to really quantify the impact of COVID-19 because the disruption was at such a grand scale, and it actually wasn't too long ago. But nonetheless, I remember the DG of the World Health Organization saying, once this pandemic kind of subsides, it will always be with us, but once the adverse effects subside, the next real concern is going to be mental health. And we're really starting to see signs of all of that now. Are you finding that workplaces are alive to this? Or is everybody trying to get along as if we haven't experienced one of the worst health crises that the world has ever seen?
I definitely think it's a case, particularly in this sample, of people just trying to get along. As I said, 60% have gone back to the office or on-site work. And so this opportunity that COVID gave us to reorganize, to rethink, to be absolutely innovative has almost fallen a little bit by the wayside. But we do see interesting results in terms of COVID. Do you know that only 8% of our sample felt that COVID and the experience of lockdowns worsened their mental health? Numerous people said, no, it didn't worsen my mental health at all. In fact, it was wonderful because I've got an anxiety disorder and I can be at home with family and friends and feel safe. Or I lost the job that was stressing me out, or I found a better organization to work for. So that's particularly important. And then if I can just also sneak in another point, we are seeing the impact of COVID in terms of workplace mental health support. So we are seeing employee assistance programs, or what we call EAPs, being defunded in some organizations. And that's a really tough consequence because people who would normally get to see a psychologist at work, perhaps even 2 or 3 sessions, are now having to pay out of pocket. And that's not happening in every workplace. In some workplaces, people do still have EAPs, but they've got no time to attend to their own wellness or even to go to any of the wellness events that are on offer. So it's a question really of trickle-down defunding and not making enough time, or employees and employers not working together to carve out the time that they need to focus on their mental health.
Yeah, I'd hate to people feeling worse than they did before we started our discussion, Doc. So I'm hoping for some solutions around how anybody who is really resonating with what we've spoken about can start the process slowly of trying to mitigate against falling into some kind of mental abyss. Where does one start, especially if they feel stuck?
That's such an important thing. I think that the first key factor there is to remember that we give ourselves permission to rest. We give ourselves permission to disconnect. Now, I know that in Australia, the government has actually promulgated a law which gives you the right to disconnect. But we do have something called the Basic Conditions of Employment Act that says you can't work more than 45 hours a week, even if you're doing overtime. Make use of the legal structures that are there and think most carefully about it. A key fact is that if you do have a mental illness or challenge of any kind, seek out care and treatment. It's really important to talk about it and become treated, because if you have depression, for example, you might be prone to rumination, and that cognitive aspect of depression will stop you from switching off. So it's not just better habits, but it's also getting the treatment that you need. And then I suppose lastly, to quote one of the psychologists at SADAG, burnout is not a badge of honor. So it's really important on that employee to employee level. If you're comfortable working overtime, don't assume everyone else is, and try to be relationally more positive around it. We do see that some employees are very happy within their organizations, and it's because it's a team effort and there's two-way communication, flatter power structures, and time to talk about their mental health.
Sure. What an insightful conversation. Dr. Bronwyn, really do appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Dr. Bronwyn Zwazanowski-Venter, there you go, is with the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, helping us take stock of this year's World Mental Health Day.